May 16, 1943, R.F. Scampton, Lincolnshire. Wing Commander Guy Gibson, 24, from Porthleven, pressed his gloved hand against Lancaster ED-932's cold metal skin as ground crews wheeled the massive cylindrical bomb beneath the fuselage. His bomber carried something nobody had tested in combat. The weapon weighed 9,250 pounds. Engineers had spun it backwards at 500 revolutions per minute using a hydraulic motor that screamed like tortured metal. Gibson's crew called it upkeep. German defenders would call it something else entirely when water crushed their industrial valley into mud and wreckage. This would be Gibson's defining moment. What happened next would determine whether 133 airmen returned home or vanished into German flak and darkness across 600 miles of enemy territory. Britain's Bomber Command faced an impossible problem in early 1943. German industry concentrated in the Ruhr Valley, protected by anti-aircraft batteries that shredded conventional bombing raids. The Möhne Dam stood 40 meters tall, 34 meters thick at its base, holding back 140 million cubic meters of water that powered steel mills, armaments factories, and the Nazi war machine. Traditional bombs bounced off the massive dam walls like pebbles thrown at a castle. Torpedo nets stretched 150 feet from the dam's face, catching anything dropped from above. Squadron leader Henry Maudslay, 21, from Norfolk, watched his Lancaster being fueled on the hardstand beside Gibson's aircraft. Fresh from honeymoon leave, Maudslay had accumulated 38 operational sorties. His bomb aimer's calculations showed they needed to release at exactly 60 feet above water, traveling at 232 miles per hour, precisely 425 yards from the target. Miss any parameter by seconds or feet, and the cylindrical bomb would shatter against the dam or skip over it harmlessly into the reservoir beyond. Conventional weapons had failed spectacularly throughout 1942. Bomber Command lost 47 Lancasters attempting to hit Ruhr targets in March alone. Standard 4,000-pound blockbusters cratered earth beside dams, but barely scratched concrete faces engineered to withstand earthquakes. The Möhne's curved masonry wall, built in 1913, had survived 30 years of pressure from water weighing millions of tons. German engineers believed no bomb existed that could breach it. Flight Sergeant George Chalmers, navigator in Gibson's crew, marked their route on maps spread across the operations room table. They would fly 50 feet above Dutch farmland, below radar coverage, threading between known flak positions. Moonlight would guide them. German night fighters would hunt them. Every Lancaster carried 7 men with no parachutes, too low to bail out if hit. Could they survive? The math suggested otherwise. Flak towers on the Möhne Dam mounted 20mm cannons with a firing rate of 800 rounds per minute. Gunners there had practiced against low-flying targets since dam construction. Gibson's aircraft would approach in moonlight at a treetop height, straight at guns with clear firing solutions. The Lancaster's top speed of 287 miles per hour wouldn't save them. Neither would armor that stopped rifle bullets, but not cannon shells. Pilot Officer John Hopgood, 22, from Hampstead, checked his watch. 21:15 hours. His Lancaster M Mother sat third in the departure order. Hopgood had earned his Distinguished Flying Cross bombing cologne 6 months earlier. Tonight he would attack second, following Gibson through whatever hell waited at the Möhne's towers. His wireless operator, Sergeant John Minchin, 22, had written 7 letters home that afternoon, 1 more than usual. The problem multiplied with distance. Eder Dam stood 70 miles southeast of Möhne, surrounded by hills rising 1,000 feet. Pilots would descend into a narrow valley, release at cliff level, then climb vertically to avoid smashing into the opposite hillside. The Sorpa Dam's earthen construction demanded different tactics entirely, flying parallel to its length, bomb rolling down the sloped face rather than bouncing. Barnes Wallis's revolutionary design offered Britain's only chance. The 50-year-old aeronautical engineer had calculated that underwater explosions against masonry multiplied force by water pressure. His bomb needed to sink against the dam's face, 30 feet below surface, then detonate. The resulting shock wave would crack concrete from below, where even thick walls became vulnerable. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby, 23, from Sussex, strapped into his pilot seat while ground crew attached the spinning mechanism. Maltby's bomb would be the 5th dropped at Möhne, if Gibson, Hopgood, and 3 others failed first. Each attack meant another pass through increasingly alert defenders. By the 5th approach, every German gunner would have range, elevation, and lead time calculated precisely. They would be waiting. What nobody told the crews, German intelligence had already noted increased low-level training flights over British reservoirs. Reports reached Berlin describing Lancasters practicing with spotlights aimed at water. Wehrmacht command hadn't connected those observations to dam attacks, but security officers had ordered reservoir defenses reinforced across the Ruhr throughout May. The element of surprise Gibson counted on might not exist at all. Sergeant Vivian Nicholson, 23, wireless operator in Hopgood's crew, received final radio codes at 2123 hours. His equipment would transmit one word if Möhne Dam breached: nigger, Gibson's black Labrador's name. For Eder, dinghy. For Sorp, goner. British commanders listening 400 miles away would know within minutes whether 19 Lancasters and 133 men had succeeded or died trying. How many more would die? That depended on German reaction speed. Night fighters stationed at Arnhem could reach the dams in 18 minutes. Messerschmitt Bf-110s carried 20mm cannons that could shred Lancaster bombers before pilots even saw them coming. Luftwaffe controllers monitored British radio traffic constantly. One transmission error could vector fighters directly to the attack route. Gibson pulled on his leather-flying helmet at 2128 hours. Across the airfield, 18 other Lancaster bombers prepared for engine start. Some crews would return by dawn. Others would burn in Dutch farmland or plunge into German reservoirs. None of them knew which fate awaited in the darkness, gathering over continental Europe. The towers at Möhne Dam held 12 German gunners under Sergeant Karl Schutte's command. They had ammunition for 4,000 rounds per cannon, good visibility. Clear moonlight reflecting off the reservoir's calm surface. Perfect conditions for shooting down low-flying aircraft. Schutte's crews had trained for this scenario, though they expected torpedo bombers, not what was actually coming toward them through the night. Barnes Wallis paced the carpet in his Weybridge office 9 months earlier, August 1942, sketching circles on paper. The 50-year-old assistant chief designer at Vickers Aviation had spent 3 years calculating how to destroy German dams. Every conventional approach failed his mathematics. Bombs dropped from altitude missed by hundreds of yards. Low-level torpedoes hit protective nets. Direct contact explosives lacked the mass to crack 40-meter concrete walls. Could anything work? Wallis's answer lay not in explosive power, but in physics most engineers ignored. Research by A.R. Collins at the Road Research Laboratory had proven that underwater explosions generated shock waves far more destructive than airbursts. Water didn't compress. It transferred explosive force directly into any solid surface. A 6,000-pound charge detonating against a dam wall underwater would hit with pressure equivalent to 30,000 pounds in air. Wallis needed to place his bomb against the Möhne's upstream face, 30 feet below the surface. The problem? How to deliver it there. Wallis had solved similar puzzles designing the R-100 airship and Wellington bomber's geodetic frame. His mind worked in geometry and physics rather than conventional engineering. What happened next would transform dam busting from impossible theory into brutal reality. Cannonballs had skipped across water since the 1700s. Naval gunners used ricochet fire to extend range and defeat wooden ship hulls below the waterline. German physicist Heinrich Magnus had quantified the aerodynamics in 1852. Spinning projectiles generated lift, extending bounce distance dramatically. Wallis connected three concepts nobody had combined before: ricochet physics, underwater explosive force, and backspin mechanics. His bomb would skip across the reservoir surface like a stone thrown by a child, then sink against the dam wall exactly where water pressure would maximize destruction. Initial designs used spherical projectiles. Wallis tested them in his garden using his daughter's marbles, a homemade catapult, and tin baths filled with water. The marbles bounced predictably when launched with backspin. Without spin, they sank after one impact. The physics proved sound at small scale. Scaling up to 9,250 pounds presented engineering challenges that would consume 7 months of frantic development. The breakthrough came from George Edwards, another Vickers engineer and keen cricketer. He recognized backspin principles from bowling technique. A cricket ball with heavy backspin bounced differently than one with topspin. It stayed lower, traveled farther, and gripped surfaces rather than skipping away. Edwards suggested reversing Wallis's initial spin direction. The change proved critical. Backspin made the cylindrical bomb trail behind the dropping aircraft, preventing blast damage to the Lancaster. More importantly, backspin caused the bomb to roll backwards down the dam face after striking it, maintaining contact with concrete until reaching detonation depth. Wallis presented his concept to the Air Ministry in February 1943. Officials called it impossible. The bomb weighed 3 times standard Lancaster payload limits. Release height of 60 feet left no margin for error. Too high, and the casing would shatter on impact. Too low, and the aircraft would hit the water. Speed requirements demanded flying at 232 miles per hour exactly, threading between stall speed and structural limits. Any variation would send the bomb skipping over the dam or sinking short of the wall. Opposition melted when Wallis demonstrated scale models at the National Physical Laboratory. A wooden cylinder spinning at calculated velocity skipped across a test tank precisely as mathematics predicted. It struck a model dam, sank against the face, and positioned perfectly for explosive contact. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, head of Bomber Command, authorized full development on February 26, 1943. Wallis had 11 weeks to make upkeep operational. Manufacturing began at Vickers Barrow facility under impossible deadlines. The cylindrical bomb measured 60 inches long, 50 inches in diameter. Its steel casing needed to withstand impacts at 232 miles per hour without fracturing. Internal hydrostatic pistols would trigger detonation at exactly 30 feet depth. Too shallow and explosive force would waste into air. Too deep and the bomb might lodge in reservoir mud rather than against concrete. Each bomb required precision machining to tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. The spinning mechanism challenged Lancaster modifications severely. Engineers mounted a hydraulic motor in the bomb bay, connecting to the weapon via a drive belt. The motor spun upkeep backwards at 500 revolutions per minute before release. At that rotation speed, the cylindrical bomb became a gyroscope weighing nearly 5 tons. Releasing it incorrectly could rip the Lancaster's belly open or send the aircraft into an uncontrollable roll. Testing moved to Reculver bombing range on the Kent coast in March 1943. Test pilot Mutt Summers flew the first live drop on April 29th. The cylindrical bomb skipped 4 times across calm water, each bounce covering approximately 150 yards. It sank 20 seconds after the final impact, exactly as Wallis had calculated. Subsequent tests refined release parameters. Pilots needed to maintain 232 miles per hour within 5 mph tolerance. Height had to stay at 60 feet, measured using 2 spotlights mounted under the Lancaster's nose and tail. When the light pools converged on water surface, altitude was perfect. Would these specifications work under combat conditions? Nobody knew. Test ranges offered calm water, no defensive fire, and unlimited practice runs. The Möhne Reservoir would present moonlit chop 20mm cannon fire from multiple angles and exactly one chance for each crew. Miss the parameters, and you died for nothing. Guy Gibson hand-selected 133 airmen for 617 Squadron in late March 1943. He chose pilots with minimum 500 operational hours and proven low-level flying skills. Navigators needed superior map-reading abilities since the entire route avoided landmarks Germans would expect. Bomb aimers required steady nerves. They would guide pilots through flak while calculating release points to 1-second accuracy. Gibson told none of them what they would attack until May 15th, less than 24 hours before takeoff. Training consumed 6 weeks. Crews flew practice runs over the Derwent Reservoir in Derbyshire, simulating Möhne and Eder Dam approaches. They learned to judge 60-foot altitude by watching the spotlight pools below. Navigators memorized European topography from aerial photographs. Wireless operators practiced brevity codes. Gunners test-fired continuously, knowing German defenders would have clear shots at close range. The cylindrical bomb's backspin created one final complication. As it rolled down the dam face underwater, gyroscopic forces tried to twist it sideways. Wallis calculated that 30 feet of depth would overcome rotational momentum before the bomb could rotate away from contact. His math gave 90% confidence. The remaining 10% meant some bombs might spin away from the dam wall and detonate harmlessly in deep water. Pilots would never know if their attack succeeded until reconnaissance aircraft photographed the results days later. Gibson's first test run over Derwent Reservoir on April 1, 1943, nearly ended in disaster. He misjudged altitude by 15 feet, pulling up at the last second as his Lancaster's belly skimmed water surface. The spotlight technique worked in theory. When two beams converged into a figure-8 shape, height measured exactly 60 feet. In practice, judging beam convergence while flying 232 miles per hour through darkness required concentration no pilot had developed yet. Gibson's flight engineer, Sergeant John Pulford, shouted corrections over intercom noise as moorland hills flashed past wingtips. Could they master this skill before German gunners shredded them over the Ruhr? Practice intensified throughout April. Crews flew multiple sorties daily, approaching Derwent Dam from different angles. They learned to recognize the precise moment when spotlight pools touched. Too early meant flying too high. The cylindrical bomb would shatter on impact. Too late meant hitting water. The Lancaster would cartwheel into the reservoir at 232 miles per hour, killing everyone instantly. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby's crew achieved consistent 60-foot approaches by late April. Others struggled with altitude control, bouncing between 50 and 80 feet as air currents lifted or dropped their heavy bombers. Navigator training presented different challenges. Sergeant Vivian Nicholson plotted routes across Dutch countryside using reconnaissance photographs showing individual farmhouses. They would navigate by moonlight, identifying barns, church steeples, and canal intersections. One wrong turn could put Lancasters over known flak concentrations. German defenders had positioned 80mm guns along likely approach routes to the Ruhr, specifically to catch low-flying bombers. Those weapons could track aircraft at 15 rounds per minute. Nicholson memorized 47 navigation checkpoints between Scampton and the Möhne Dam, each one critical for staying below radar coverage while avoiding sudden ground rises. What would happen if German fighters intercepted them at treetop height? Bomber Command Intelligence estimated 12 night fighter squadrons operated within range of the target zone. Messerschmitt Bf-110s patrolled with radar equipment capable of detecting aircraft 4 miles away. A Lancaster flying at 50 feet had no room to maneuver defensively. One burst from a Bf-110's nose-mounted 20mm cannons would send it flaming into Dutch farmland. Gibson's crews practiced defensive gunner positions, knowing rear turrets provided their only chance against pursuit from above. Wireless operator Sergeant Alistair Taylor developed abbreviated communication codes. Standard radio procedure consumed too many seconds during combat. Taylor's system used single words. Goner meant bomb released. Dinghy confirmed visual contact with target. Cooler indicated heavy flak. German radio monitoring stations listened constantly for British transmissions. Every broadcast risked revealing the attack route. Taylor calculated his crews could transmit critical information in under 5 seconds, barely enough time for enemy direction-finding equipment to establish bearing. Bombing accuracy tests revealed disturbing patterns. Even experienced bomb aimers like Flight Sergeant George Deering achieved only 60% hits on practice targets. The cylindrical bomb's unusual ballistics made aiming calculations difficult. Standard bomb sights assumed vertical drops and predictable trajectories. Upkeep skipped horizontally across water surface, bouncing 3 to 5 times before reaching the target. Each bounce depended on water conditions, aircraft speed, and release. Height, variables multiplied beyond conventional calculation methods. Deering solved the problem through repetition. He flew 47 practice runs over Derwent, memorizing visual cues rather than mathematical calculations. When the reservoir's curved dam edge aligned with a specific point on his bomb sight, conditions were correct. His accuracy climbed to 85% by early May. Other bomb aimers adopted similar techniques, developing instinctive timing that bypassed complex trigonometry. Flak resistance training took crews to gunnery ranges, where ground teams simulated German defensive fire. Tracer rounds arced toward approaching Lancasters as pilots maintained attack runs. Several crews broke off early, banking away from simulated cannon fire. Gibson grounded them immediately. The actual attack would demand flying straight through concentrated flak for 30 seconds before release. Any deviation would waste the bomb and kill the crew for nothing. Only pilots who held steady under simulated fire received mission assignments. Late April brought mechanical complications. 3 Lancasters suffered hydraulic failures in the bomb spinning mechanism. The motor's drive belt snapped under stress of rotating 9,250-pound cylinders to 500 revolutions per minute. Engineers reinforced belt housings, but failures continued sporadically. Crews developed emergency procedures. If hydraulic systems failed, they would abort the bombing run rather than release non-spinning weapons. Without backspin, the cylindrical bomb would skip unpredictably and probably miss the target entirely. Barnes Wallis visited Scampton on May 10th to observe training firsthand. He watched Gibson's crew execute a perfect practice run, 60 feet altitude, 232 miles per hour, bomb release at precisely 425 yards from target. The dummy weapon skipped 4 times and struck the dam model dead center. Wallis calculated that similar accuracy at Möhne would breach the dam with 5 hits maximum. German defenses would determine whether crews survived long enough to deliver those 5 attacks. Navigation rehearsals extended to full route simulations. Crews flew from Scampton southeast to the Wash, turned east across the North Sea, descended to 50 feet over Dutch coastline, then followed canals and rivers to simulate the approach to German reservoirs. They maintained radio silence throughout, navigating purely by landmark recognition. Flight Lieutenant Les Monroe's navigator, Flight Officer Frank Rumbles, discovered that coastal defenses had intensified since reconnaissance photos were taken. New flak positions appeared along the Dutch shore, positions that would shred Lancasters arriving at dawn if attacks ran long. Timing became critical. The operation required moonlight for visual navigation, but needed to conclude before sunrise exposed returning bombers to daylight fighters. Mission planners calculated 23 minutes per dam attack, including multiple bombing runs if initial attempts failed. That schedule allowed no margin for delays. Crews departing Scampton at 21:30 hours would reach Möhne by 00:15 hours, finish all 3 dam attacks by 200 hours, and return to England before dawn at 0430 hours. Any delays meant flying home in daylight, a death sentence for damaged aircraft. Practice runs revealed another problem: communication between aircraft. Gibson needed to coordinate multiple bombers attacking the same target sequentially. Standard radio procedure was too slow. He developed hand signals and lamp codes visible from adjacent Lancasters. 2 flashes meant hold position, 3 meant begin attack run, steady light meant abort. Pilots practiced formation flying at 50 feet altitude, maintaining visual contact while avoiding mid-air collisions in darkness. Final rehearsals on May 14th went nearly perfectly. 17 of 19 crews achieved bombing accuracy above 80%. 2 crews struggled with altitude maintenance and received additional training. Gibson's navigator, Pilot Officer Torger Terum, confirmed route timing: 87 minutes outbound to Dutch coast, 56 minutes across occupied territory to Möhne, 23 minutes attack time per dam. Total mission duration, approximately 6 hours. Fuel reserves allowed 30 minutes for contingencies, enough for 1 navigation error or minor battle damage, but not both. Would these preparations prove sufficient? German defenses at the Möhne had received reinforcement orders on May 12th. Intelligence intercepts revealed increased radio traffic around Ruhr reservoirs. Something had alerted enemy commanders to potential threats against water infrastructure. Whether they expected aircraft attacks remained unknown, but defensive readiness had clearly increased during the final days before Operation Chastise launched. Gibson's Lancaster, G. George, lifted from Scampton's runway at 21:39 hours on May 16th. Merlin engines roared at full power, straining to haul 65,000 pounds into moonlit sky. The cylindrical bomb hung beneath the fuselage, its hydraulic spinning motor already whining. Gibson climbed to 100-200 feet, leveled off, then descended toward the North Sea. Behind him, 8 more Lancasters followed at intervals, the first attack wave targeting Möhne Dam directly. Crossing the English coast at Southwold, Gibson dropped to 100 feet. Salt water spray misted his windscreen as the Lancaster thundered toward Holland at 240 miles per hour. Navigator Torger Terum called course corrections over the intercom. Their route skirted known flak concentrations, threading between Dutch coastal batteries that had destroyed 23 bombers the previous month. Moonlight turned the sea silver. Perfect visibility meant perfect conditions for enemy gunners as well. They crossed into Holland at 2328 hours. Gibson descended further, skimming 60 feet above farmland. Windmills flashed past wingtips. Canals reflected moonlight below. Front gunner Fred Sutherland watched for power lines. At this altitude, cables would slice through the Lancaster like cheese wire through butter. German searchlights swept the horizon 5 miles north, hunting for intruders. Gibson banked south, following a river valley that masked his approach from radar stations. Pilot Officer John Hopgood in M. Mother flew 2 miles behind Gibson. His bomb aimer, Pilot Officer John Fraser, counted landmarks through the clear nose panel. They had crossed the checkpoint at Rees correctly. Münster lay 15 miles ahead. Beyond that, the Möhne Reservoir waited with its towers, guns, and 12 defenders who had practiced this moment for years. Flight Lieutenant Bill Astell's Lancaster, B. Baker, flew third in formation. His wireless operator, Sergeant Abram Garschewitz, monitored German radio frequencies. Luftwaffe controllers were broadcasting alert messages. Something had triggered defensive responses across the region. Whether they had detected the approaching bombers or were responding to unrelated threats, Garschewitz couldn't determine. He tapped out a warning code to Gibson: possible increased enemy activity ahead. At 0009 hours, disaster struck the formation. Astell's Lancaster clipped high-tension wires crossing a valley near Borken. The bomber cartwheeled into the ground at 240 miles per hour. Fuel tanks erupted. 7 men died instantly, never knowing they had flown within 8 minutes of their target. The fireball lit the night sky, alerting German defenders that British bombers were operating in the area. Gibson pressed on. His target lay 4 miles ahead. Taram identified the final checkpoint, a distinctive bend in the Ruhr River. Gibson climbed to 1,000 feet to clear hills surrounding the reservoir, then descended rapidly toward water surface. Möhne Dam appeared ahead, a massive concrete wall 131 feet tall, silhouetted against the moonlit reservoir. 2 towers on the dam's crest bristled with anti-aircraft guns. Searchlights snapped on, flooding the valley with harsh white light. Sergeant Schutta's gunners on the dam towers opened fire at 00:15 hours. Tracer rounds arced toward Gibson's Lancaster in streams of orange and white. 20-millimeter shells exploded around the bomber as Gibson leveled at exactly 60 feet above water. Flight engineer Pulford called altitude corrections. Bomb aimer Spam Spafford sighted through his instrument, waiting for the precise moment when dam geometry aligned with his calibrated markers. Gibson held the Lancaster steady despite flak bursting around his cockpit. Glass shattered, metal fragments punched through the fuselage. Rear gunner Trevor Roper returned fire, his turret guns hammering at the dam towers. Spotlights converged. Spafford triggered the release. The cylindrical bomb dropped, hydraulic motor still spinning it backwards at 500 revolutions per minute. Upkeep struck water and bounced. Once, twice, 3 times. Each skip covered 80 yards, closing distance to the dam wall. The 4th bounce brought it against concrete. The bomb sank, backspin keeping it pressed to the dam face. 30 feet down, hydrostatic pressure triggered the detonator. 6,000 pounds of Torpex explosive erupted underwater, focused by water pressure into a shockwave that hammered the dam's upstream face with force equivalent to 30,000 pounds of TNT. Water erupted in a geyser 1,000 feet high. The shock wave rocked Gibson's Lancaster as he climbed away from the target zone. He banked hard, looking back at the dam. The wall remained intact. His bomb had struck correctly, but failed to breach the massive structure. The attack would require multiple hits. Hopgood began his run at 00:18 hours. German gunners now had range and timing calculated perfectly. Tracers converged on M Mother as it descended toward the reservoir. Shells smashed through the Lancaster's port wing, igniting fuel tanks. Fire trailed behind the bomber as Hopgood fought to maintain altitude and speed. His bomb aimer, Fraser, released early. The cylindrical weapon skipped once, twice, then cleared the dam entirely and exploded against the power station on the opposite bank. Main Mother climbed, flames engulfing the port side. Hopgood ordered his crew to bail out. 3 men escaped before the Lancaster exploded at 400 feet altitude. Hopgood and his flight engineer stayed at the controls, sacrificing themselves so others could jump. The bomber hit Earth 2 miles from the dam. 5 men dead, 2 captured. The second attack had failed. Flight Lieutenant Mick Martin in P-Popsy approached third. He watched M Mother burn as he descended to attack altitude. German flak intensified. Martin's rear gunner, Flight Sergeant Tammy Simpson, fired continuously at the dam towers, trying to suppress defensive fire. Martin held rock steady at 60 feet, 232 miles per hour. His bomb aimer released. The cylindrical weapon skipped perfectly, struck the dam dead center, sank, and detonated. Another massive eruption. Water cascaded down the dam face. Martin climbed through flak, his Lancaster trailing smoke from minor hits. Gibson circled, assessing damage through binoculars. The wall showed cracks but remained intact. 2 direct hits had weakened it. How many more would it take? Squadron leader Melvin Young in A-Apple attacked 4th at 0:25 hours. His Lancaster absorbed hits crossing the reservoir but maintained course. The bomb skipped true, struck, sank, exploded. The 3rd underwater detonation sent shock waves through already weakened concrete. Massive cracks appeared running vertically down the dam face. Water began leaking through fissures. Not enough. The wall still held. David Maltby began his run in J. Johnny at 0:31 hours. This was the 5th attack. Wallis's calculated maximum needed for breach. German gunners had perfected their aim. Shells walked toward Maltby's bomber as it crossed the reservoir. He held course. Flight engineer John Fort called altitude, bomb aimer. John Fort triggered release at the exact calculated point. The cylindrical bomb performed flawlessly. 4 skips, perfect contact, 30-foot depth, detonation. The underwater explosion combined with cumulative damage from 4 previous hits. Concrete that had held 140 million cubic meters of water for 30 years finally surrendered to physics and explosive force. A crack 77 meters wide opened in the dam's center. Water pressure did the rest. The breach expanded rapidly. Within seconds, a wall of water 33 feet high erupted through the gap. 140 million cubic meters, 330 million tons, of reservoir water began pouring into the Ruhr Valley below. The flood accelerated to 15 miles per hour, carrying debris, masonry, and destruction downstream. Gibson's wireless operator transmitted the code word "nigger." Möhne Dam was breached. German civilians in Neheim-Hüsten, 7 miles downstream, heard the roar approaching. Some fled to high ground. Others didn't realize what the sound meant until water smashed through their streets at building height. The flood destroyed everything for 50 miles. Factories collapsed. Power stations vanished. Railway bridges tore from their foundations. Within an hour, the Ruhr Valley's industrial heartland lay under millions of tons of water and mud. Gibson turned his damaged Lancaster toward the secondary target, Eder Dam, 70 miles southeast. 3 bombers followed. They arrived at Irrewum 39 hours to find fog shrouding the valley. The Eder stood undefended. German commanders hadn't expected attacks this far from the Ruhr industrial zone. But the topography presented challenges worse than flak. Hills rose 1,000 feet on both sides of a narrow approach valley. Pilots would descend between cliffs, release at the valley floor, then climb nearly vertical to avoid the opposite hillside. Squadron leader Henry Maudslay attempted first. He dove into the valley, leveled briefly, released. His bomb struck the dam, but the detonation occurred as Maudslay climbed away. The blast wave caught his Lancaster, shredding control surfaces. The bomber staggered upward, mortally wounded. Maudslay transmitted a brief message, heading for home. German fighters intercepted J. Johnny 60 miles from the Dutch border. All 7 crew died in the crash. Flight Lieutenant Dave Shannon made 8 approach runs, unable to achieve proper altitude in the confined valley. On his 9th attempt, conditions aligned. The bomb skipped, struck, sank, detonated. Damage to the Eder's wall appeared minimal. The structure was designed differently than Möhne, gravity dam versus masonry arch. It required different physics to fail. Les Knight in Nan attacked at 0152 hours. His bomb struck perfectly. The combined damage from Shannon and Knight's weapons opened cracks. Knight circled for a 3rd run if needed, but as he climbed away, the Eder Dam wall collapsed. A section 72 meters wide disintegrated, releasing 202 million cubic meters of water into the Eder Valley. The flood destroyed villages, drowned livestock, and eliminated hydroelectric power to Castle's armament factories. The remaining Lancasters turned for home. Dawn approached. German fighters hunted damaged bombers across Holland. Flight Lieutenant Les Munro's aircraft, damaged by flak over the Dutch coast, had aborted before reaching targets. Flight Lieutenant Jeff Rice flew too low over the Zuider Zee, striking water and tearing his bomb loose. He returned to base without attacking. Pilot Officer Bill Otley's Lancaster was shot down by flak near Ham, all crew killed. Gibson's formation crossed the North Sea as sunrise lit the eastern horizon. His Lancaster had sustained 47 separate hits from flak and small arms. Hydraulic fluid leaked from damaged systems. 1 engine ran rough. But G. George remained airborne, carrying its exhausted crew toward Scampton. They landed at 0415 hours, 7 hours after departure. Ground crew counted returning aircraft. 11 Lancasters taxied to their hard stands. 8 were missing. Of 133 airmen who departed, 53 had died. 3 were prisoners. The casualty rate exceeded 40%, the highest loss ratio for any single Bomber Command operation. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed the results at dawn. Möhne Dam breached, 330 million tons of water released, flooding extending 50 miles downstream. Eder Dam breached, 202 million tons released, Castle region devastated. Sorpa Dam, minor damage, no breach. 12 hydroelectric power stations destroyed or disabled. Coal mines flooded. Steel production halted. Railway networks severed. An estimated 1,600 civilians dead, including 1,026 forced laborers from Poland, Russia, and Ukraine held in camps below the Eder Dam. German response mobilized immediately. Organization Taut diverted 7,000 workers from Atlantic Wall construction to dam repairs. They worked 24-hour shifts using emergency concrete mixes and prefabricated components. Möhne Dam was patched sufficiently to hold water by September 23, 1943, 4 months after the attack. Full repairs required until 1944. The Eder took longer, its complex reconstruction extending into late 1944. Albert Speer, German Minister of Armaments, later wrote that the raids caused chaos in Ruhr production for months. Power generation dropped 75% immediately. Water supply for steel mills vanished, halting production at Krupp, Thyssen, and other major manufacturers. The loss of hydroelectric capacity forced Germany to divert coal from war production to conventional power plants. Transportation disruptions prevented movement of finished weapons to frontline units. Strategic impact extended beyond immediate damage. The raids demonstrated British capability for precision strikes against defended infrastructure. German commanders diverted anti-aircraft batteries and fighter squadrons to protect remaining dams, weakening defenses elsewhere. Resources committed to dam reconstruction could have fortified Normandy beaches or built additional submarines. Britain gained a propaganda victory that boosted Allied morale worldwide. Guy Gibson received the Victoria Cross from King George VI on June 22, 1943. 33 other crew members received decorations including 5 Distinguished Service Orders and 10 Distinguished Flying Crosses. Gibson spent months on publicity tours in America, then returned to operations. He died September 19, 1944, when his Mosquito crashed returning from a raid over Germany. He was 26 years old. Barnes Wallis reportedly wept when told of the aircrew casualties. He never designed another weapon requiring such hazardous delivery tactics. His subsequent work focused on standoff weapons like the Tall Boy and Grand Slam bombs, 12,000 and 22,000-pound penetrators dropped from high altitude, eliminating the need for low-level approaches through concentrated flak. 617 Squadron continued as a specialist precision bombing unit. They attacked the German battleship Tirpitz using Tall Boy bombs, sinking it in November 1944. They destroyed V-2 rocket facilities, railway viaducts, and U-boat pens using increasingly sophisticated targeting methods. The squadron remained active after the war, transitioning through Canberras, Vulcans, and eventually Tornado bombers. Today it operates as a training squadron, its badge showing a broken dam with the motto, Après moi le déluge, after me, the flood. Lessons from Operation Chastise influenced bombing doctrine for decades. The mission proved that precision attacks could achieve strategic objectives conventional area bombing could not. It demonstrated the value of specialized squadrons with intensive training for specific targets. It showed that technological innovation, bouncing bombs, precision altimetry, coordinated tactics, could overcome defenses that massed firepower alone could not defeat. The human cost remained controversial. 53 airmen dead represented nearly 40% of the attacking force, unsustainable losses for regular operations. The 1,600 civilian casualties, predominantly forced laborers, raised ethical questions about collateral damage versus military necessity. German propaganda exploited the civilian deaths extensively. British commanders argued that disrupting war production justified the operation despite casualties. Modern analysis suggests the raids achieved significant but temporary impact. German industry recovered faster than British planners expected. Alternative power sources and emergency repairs minimized long-term production losses. However, the operation's psychological impact, demonstrating British resolve and capability, exceeded its physical destruction. At a time when Allied fortunes in 1943 remained uncertain, the Dambusters' raid provided tangible evidence that Germany could be struck at its industrial heart. The 19 Lancasters that departed Scampton on May 16, 1943, carried more than bombs. They carried the culmination of Barnes Wallis's mathematical genius, months of intensive crew training, revolutionary engineering, and desperate Allied need for a morale-boosting victory. 11 returned. The Möhne and Eder Dams lay breached. The Ruhr Valley flooded. Germany's industrial might was proven vulnerable, and 53 young men would never see Britain again.